A day. All right, a couple of notes I'll tip back to in a sec. Code review today, I'm going to flip it up a little bit, and we're going to rebuild the part one of yesterday's code demo. So yesterday's lecture demo, I'm going to carry forward and just rebuild again today, so that you all can see that kind of happen again. That will basically sets in place of building the lab assignment from yesterday. So we're going to rebuild yesterday's lecture demo, and then I'm going to carry that directly forward into the O1 directory for today, which will be our component composition lecture code. And it's just an extension of what we did yesterday. So I figured let's start from scratch, stop there at the end of code review where we stopped yesterday, and then we'll move forward from there and build out the rest of the app. While we're doing that today, we need to talk about component composition and the difference between composition and inheritance, because we've primarily been focused on either a static asset or an asset that's been, or I should say a static component or a component that's been inheriting properties. Okay, so now we need to generalize that a little bit further and get you thinking about reusable as a form or in the form of composition. Right? Way more modular, way more abstract, and the sooner you can get your brain into thinking about composable pieces, abstract composable pieces, the better programmer you will be, right? The more effective programmer you will be. We'll talk about more about it. Once we finish up with that, we'll go back over the breadth first traversal from yesterday, and then we're going to also talk about depth first traversal today. Pre-order, in-order, and post-order are all three forms of depth first traversal. And then I'll go through that insertion method that I had you all work on yesterday. So we'll talk about how we used that, or how to effectively use that breadth first or a depth first traversal method to do something like an insertion or some other manipulation on the tree. Okay. Lab preview today will be an extension of yesterday's lab. Starting next week, we're going to start building iteratively for the week. So just a heads up, this week's introduction, similar to the first week of the back end where we had some introductory lab assignments, but going forward into next week and the week after, we'll be building on the same lab assignment through next week. Okay. And then our whiteboard challenge today is going to be using a depth first traversal method to prune a node from the tree. So we'll talk about what the definition of pruning is, and I'll get you all out there for that later on. One note before I check in on everything, something that the TAs have told me about and let me know is that there is a handful of folks that are taking the lecture code and using that as a place to stand on and refactor into the lab assignment. And please do not do that. I would like you all to write this code from scratch. Okay. One of the ways that I will avoid just trying to refactor code in place is by actually taking a file and copying it into the file that I'm going to write the code in. And that helps me not having to switch back and forth from screen to screen. I have that content right there. And as I'm writing it out, I'll actually just go line by line and write it out once so that it's, building muscle memory and kind of retaining some of the vocabulary and the structure and the syntax and the pattern. And as I go, I'll just remove and delete that code that I copied over. That's how I find it helpful to not have to flip back and forth and try and track my place and where I'm writing my code while I'm learning. Like, this is how I started to work on the React content when I was learning this stuff. So we had all these demos and all this code, and I would just grab a chunk of code and write it out myself while I was basically retyping stuff. That gives me a really good way, or a really good opportunity to debug the code that I'm typing, because I inevitably have bugs, miss a semicolon or a comma or a paren or something, whatever. Misname a variable or a component name or forget a bracket, pass in props instead of state, call the wrong property name. Just gives you a good opportunity to try and debug as you go, okay? But the thing that I don't want y'all to do is try to refactor in place. While the bones are still the same between the lecture code and the lab, it just presents a poor opportunity for us to just retype this code and actually go at it from our own perspective, from our own angle. And while it may take longer, it's a good exercise. And I need you all like really pushing through this point of struggle. Give me a quick fist of 5. How are we feeling on, call it state and props at this point? Okay, that's fair. Good. What we're doing this week is managing state through React. Okay? Tim's still trying to figure out what those numbers mean, or
Ready.
take a drink of coffee, Tim. Did you just realize there were 5 fingers?
I have some very profound thoughts throughout that.
That's fair. I can accept that. Next week, we are going to flip this concept of managing state in React on its head and introduce Redux. And I know I mentioned that on Monday that we were going to make some significant changes as we go here. I need to know if there are any major roadblocks in your brain right now about state and props. Because when it comes to Monday, the diagrams that we've been doing on the board, the visuals that we've been doing, the code that we've been writing is going to change pretty dramatically. And at a core concept, at a very basic abstract level, many of these things are consistent. They are the same. But the way that we implement state and manage state starting on Monday is going to change pretty dramatically where the code is concerned.
I think my biggest hang up right now is just understanding how the components with state and props, how, I mean, I know you've gone through it, but just wrapping my brain around understanding how those pass and the flow of data is still really blurry to me.
Yeah. Okay.
That function that you have on the app component that
Yep.
like the set state, is that like going to be a thing that happens on every app that we? Because it was really helpful. It was like, wow, that's like the thing we're missing.
So
we put more things inside of it.
that get app, that's actually the primary point of refactor where starting Monday when we introduce Redux, Redux will take that piece of code and abstract it away from the component level. Right? We'll still have a way to do that, but we will be relying on Redux to do that piece of functionality for us. And if you can understand the flow of data through the application, and at even just a general level, we understand state and props, right? We're in a pretty good place for getting into Redux on Monday. Right, but I do want to know if there are any like major roadblocks right now, so that come Monday when we start to redesign our app and start talking about state management in a different format, that I can try and draw some comparisons or fill in those gaps. All right. Long story short, please don't copy and paste the lecture code and work from there forward. Retype this stuff, starting with your lab assignment. Okay. One of the things that makes that challenging for myself and the TAs to grade is when there's a bunch of commented out code or partial pieces, or we forgot to rename variables to be more semantically meaningful for the lab assignment. It just gets confusing, and it's kind of a pain in the ass in a very basic sense. Plus, I don't feel like it really gives you all the best opportunity to learn this stuff if you're just copy and pasting stuff. So
Can we copy like the small config files and stuff?
definitely. My only request there, and this is up to you all to self-manage with things like Webpack config and package.json, BabelRC, you just need to know what those things are doing. Right? As long as you understand at a base level what's happening there, give yourself a little scaffolding, that's totally fine. right? Setting up a main.js, an index.html, a components directory, a styles directory. You can have all of that, like, create a scaffold, React scaffold directory somewhere in your templates directory. I think I've told you all this before, that you should probably have a little templates directory on your computer that's like, jQuery scaffold and React scaffold, or, config files, git ignore, ESLintRC, all of these like kind of rinse and repeat documents that we drop into labs and projects every day. Set something up, set a directory up that you can just copy over called lab Isaac that has a git ignore and a readme and package JSON, and you just need, at that point what you need to go change in each of those things. When you copy it into your fork, drag it over, you've got a package JSON set up. It's got some of the generic like React packages for npm. So feel free. Anything, as soon as you are confident that you know what something does and you feel you keep rinsing and repeating this thing every day, create a way to quickly reproduce that thing. Okay, improve your workflow. All right. What else is top of mind from yesterday? What were some of the pain points, if there were any?
The pain point, but I started using prop types, and it's been helping a lot with debugging components. And it's just, you can add required and whatnot, and then React will yell at you if it's not working.
Yeah. Everything was hunky-dory.
Is it too bad?
Yeah. I love seeing your all like Canvas submissions at 11:56 p.m. Shit, I gotta get something in.
Mine was 6 o'clock this morning because I completely forgot.
Coffee is jet fuel. Woo! All right. Okay, cool. So here's what we got. Dig into code review here and get going. So here's our Webpack config. Same config from yesterday. The only change from the day before was that dev server property that we added on, which gives us access to the history API. Okay, forward and back buttons. Okay. What data structure do you think uses or is used underneath the hood of forward and back?
Stack.
Be doubly linked list or stack. Yeah, either one of those would probably be appropriate. Good. Okay. Well, I'm thinking of this. I keep throwing these like little kind of random abstract questions out like that from time to time. Here's one that I hear about on a regular basis in an interview. How would you design this pen?
Go to users and pens, figure out what they want, and then
There's our marketing team. Right? So there's one. Another one that you might actually get as a round of interviews or exam questions here during the course is something to the effect of design Twitter. Right? Talk to me about the full stack Twitter application. How would you model the back end? How would you design a wireframe for the front end? What would the UI be like? And what would be your justification for that UI? Right? There's really good kind of abstract design questions that can come out of these interviews. And I find those pretty fun because you get to really like kind of express yourself on how you would build this thing. So not everything is going to come down to a data structure in every sense, but yeah. All right. Back to it. All right, just a quick look back at the .babelrc. This sets up our presets. What's Babel for?
Transpiling.
Transpiling what?
JavaScript.
Good. Good. And just a quick reminder, we haven't looked at our index.html in a couple of days, but it has not changed. It's pretty much going to be just like that for the duration of the class.
This says Cal.
Yes, it does. That's a copy and paste job if you.
That's a good catch. The packages.
Cow say awesomeness. I think I did change the package JSON. Let's look. Here, let's change this. So this is our expense track. Hey,
Expense tracker awesomeness.
don't critique my spelling. Oh, snap. Pokemon search, that's an old one. All right.
Who's copy and pasting that?
That's fair. I accept your criticism. All right, so we've got all the right packages. Specifically, the one difference, or the one that we are most caring about for this app, is that UUID, because we're giving each expense its own unique ID. Okay. All right, and quick look at our component structure. We've got an about container for a static component, just to show a different form of routing. We also have a dashboard container, and interior to our dashboard container, or as two children components to dashboard, we have an expense form and an expense list. Okay, did y'all see that little snippet I posted from the React docs this morning? Check this out. Okay, so React is all about one-way data flow down the component hierarchy, which may not be immediately clear which given component should own what state. This is often the most challenging part for newcomers to understand, so follow these steps to figure it out. Okay, so for each piece of state in your application, identify every component that renders something based on that state. Okay, so this goes all the way back to having a wireframe or a design comp. Okay, so if we're looking at Twitter, right? You got your profile photo up there. You've got a header with a nav, something like this. You know, there's a box. Here's some content, nav. There's usually an aside of like hot topics over here. You've got your Twitter feed or your tweet feed, and then what you usually have, I don't know, what do you call this, like people to follow? Right? Does everybody know Twitter? Does everybody have a Twitter account or use Twitter? Okay, some degree, seen it, knows what Twitter is,
What's that?
knows that Twitter's trying to expand to 280 characters.
They've said that for the last like 3 years. I'm sorry, but
They're
that's not
testing it out right now.
I don't believe it until I see it.
More annoying characters from Trump, I'm sorry.
All right. I'll let that slide, but remember, we're politically agnostic here, folks.
Right.
All right. So, we would need to take this comp. Let's say a marketing team gave us this page. As a developer, we would need to isolate all of the areas on this page that manage state. Okay? So I would say there's state there. There's state here, here, and here. Okay? So this would be user state. This would be like topic state. Tweet state, and people or other people state, right? This page needs to be aware of people that you don't follow, okay? Because it's recommending that you follow these people based on others that you're already following. This state needs to be aware of people that you are following, right? And then they, of course, get to put in their promoted tweets. This space is tracking hot topics, what's trending right now, Okay? This needs to be aware of your user information. So based on that, we can start to then break down each of these areas, the header, for example, into different components, like a navbar component that sits inside of the header and a user profile or a profile information component that would sit here, right? Or the avatar, okay? And you've got hot topics, you've got tweets, you've got follow these people, right? So you've got a header with a nav, maybe a section or an aside for the profile. You've got an aside here, an aside here, a main content section here that drops in each of your tweets. And so identify every component that renders something based on that state. Find a common owner component, a single component above all the components that need the state in that hierarchy. So if we think of this whole box, this big box, as the application, okay? We probably need user state at the application level. Because that needs to trickle down to here, needs to trickle down to here, here, maybe not the topics, but at least 1, 2, 3 other places within that, right? So that's something that I would probably lift up pretty high, right? Either the common owner or the component higher up in the hierarchy should own the state. Okay, so what we're talking about in terms of our expense tracker with the app, dashboard, form, and list, right? We need to decide where state should live for these two things to function. Dashboard, maybe. Application, in our case, yes. But that doesn't mean that if this were a larger application, this dashboard could be a smaller piece of functionality that just interacts with these two components or the functionality here. So we could store that expense functionality in this dashboard state. Okay. So if you can't find a component where it makes sense to own the state, create a new component simply for holding the state and add it somewhere in the hierarchy above the common components. Okay? So that might say if we've got, another dashboard for some other functionality, and we can't really decide, should this dashboard own these two? Maybe we need it over here. Maybe we inject something at this level to manage the state for these two that can then be passed down to any children in that hierarchy. Right? We don't always have to lift things up to that app level state. Okay. I keep coming back to those React docs. They're like, the React documentation is some of the best documentation I've ever seen. So, okay. So let's take a look here. CD into demos, make big, big, big. We're going to go into code review. We've got node modules. Let's do a tree and just take a look at this one more time from this perspective. Okay. So each of our components has a Sass partial and also an index.js. We've got our main HTML or our index.html and our main JavaScript, main.js. Okay. So let's start out with the main JS.
You're doing the expense form, right?
Yep.
We didn't do that yesterday.
Correct.
And
I'm basically rebuilding what I did yesterday in lecture because I'm going to continue working with this today. Make sense?
not really. I get what you said.
What doesn't make sense?
Why wouldn't you show us the notepad?
Because I want you to figure it out. Y'all have been spoiled by me doing your lab assignments every day in code review. So we're going to rewrite yesterday, which is effectively the same core concepts to what you did in lab. continue on with it today, and you'll continue working on yesterday's lab. Yes, sir.
So, from the bonus, whatever it's called, I forgot, from yesterday.
Uh-huh.
Like the stretch goals, I don't remember what it's called.
Yep.
From yesterday, the adding, like making the list, items, like the elements of the list.
Yeah.
A reasonable component, is that something we should still be shooting towards? Like with the delete button?
You're going to do that today.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't get there, but I just wanted to see if we should be heading that way.
And yeah, the other thing is, I use main as my like launch point. Like I host an app as well as make a bunch of shit like that.
Say that again.
Just that. That's my main.
Oh, you componentized app? Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Totally.
Sure that's-
Yeah, I haven't made that step yet. We're going to do that starting Monday, though, where main becomes just a straight-up entry point to the application, and then the actual app component is also inside of that app or that component directory. So just further modularizes things, right? Very similar to what we did in the back end with entry.js or the index.js being a kickoff point with 3 lines of code. So yeah, we will move in that direction. All right, so let's set up our app container. So this extends React component. Gonna have a constructor. Inherits props, which we call super props. And we're gonna set up our state object, and it will track expenses as an empty array. And our budget we'll set to $400 just to get us going. And then we also know from yesterday we're going to have this .getApp as a method. So I'll go ahead and bind that to the constructor now. And that takes an expense. I'm sorry, that does not take an argument. Getting ahead of myself. And returns an array with state as this.state. And set state with this.setState.bind this. Okay. And then I'm also going to use one of our component life cycles. Component did update. And we'll just console.log state so that we can see the state changes in the browser console as the component updates and re-renders. Okay, and then we'll also fire off our little render method, do a quick return of a div with a class name of application. Okay, and before we forget, we need to connect this to the DOM. So React DOM.render, pass in our app document.getElement by ID, pass in the root ID, and now we've got a wired up scaffold for the component.
Console.log.
Thank you. Console log. All right. Now, here inside of our div, okay, we could also say that there's an appropriate use case for this being a main tag, okay? But rather than that, I'm going to go ahead and create a quick header with a nav, an UL, with an li, and an anchor tag times 2, one for about. We'll actually put that one below. And one for dashboard. Okay, so now that header and navigation is going to sit on every page that we render. Okay, which also means that I now have, I really hate that main does not autocomplete. That means that I can drop my main content tag here, give that a class name of main content for later styles, and now we need to set up the router. Okay, browser router, and browser router, closing tag. We need a section because we found out yesterday that the browser router can only render one element. Similar to our render method, we have only one element that can be returned, so we wrap all of our routes in a section. Now we could say route, and this is a self-closing tag. Will be an exact path. First path will be a slash, and the component that we're going to render will be the dashboard container. Okay, and what we're doing here, just a quick reminder, is we are setting up an anonymous function that will return this whole component. And the reason we use this syntax is so that we can pass in props. So we invoke getApp directly inside of this, which means that in the dashboard container, I can say this.props.app dot state to get the read-only state, or this.props.app.setState to reach up and affect the state at this level. Yes, sir.
So, and you're doing this because that get app contains the set state that we need to pass down. What would you have there if you only wanted to pass the state, like the props, without the ability to set state? Would it just be? It wouldn't be the anonymous function. It would be just dashboard container by itself.
We would still need the anonymous function. Anytime you're going to pass props through to another component in this format, in this construct of routes, you would need the anonymous function because we have to define something on that component tag. So if we wanted to just pass state, I would say expenses, this dot state dot expenses. Go ahead, Gav.
We need this informative function because you can't set the state anywhere else except here in this app.
Correct. Well, you can't set the app state.
So like then, because I was going to ask one thing. So we're rendering like our nodes from this array and app, right? It seems like it would just make more sense to have that be like dashboard layer, right? So
Was there a question there?
yes, I can't remember now.
Okay. All right. If you think about it, let me know.
Just fade away.
All right. So we know that from the definition of those routes, we're going to eventually import dashboard container from component, dashboard container, and the about container, not that about container. From about container. Okay, so we'll start off with just rendering out our about container real quick. Right, and inside of this, we're going to define a class about container, which extends React component, static component. So we're just going to render and return. And we are just going to return a div here with a class name of about container. And before I get too far, export default about container.
I remember my question.
What's up?
Why are we rendering from an array that's in the app when we don't only need to go back up to the dashboard?
Because we have set the state in the app layer.
Or can't we set that? Can't we create that array state in the dashboard?
Could.
Only just work from there.
Could. Yeah. dashboard, you can think of the dashboard as just a container for all of these other things that we're dropping in, but the application layer is where we've chosen to set our state for the expense budget application. Okay, absolutely, you can make a case to drop that state down to the dashboard layer for just that expense functionality. So there's both of those would be right answers. All right. Here we're just going to return an H2 that says welcome to the about page.
So if we wanted to, in the about page, do something like, you know, show a count of the number of notes you have, or expenses or something related to the expense array, then that's when you would want
Yep.
the app state to hold the array. not
Yep.
the dashboard.
We would need to super props. We would need to inherit those props, pass some state or read-only information into the component tag, and then take advantage of that here to render it. Yeah.
Is it like best practice to keep that state in the container directly above where it's going to be needed and not like 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 or more levels up?
Yeah. Yeah, so our application is pretty small right now, so that's why I told Gavin a second ago, it's okay the way that we've designed this, where the application state is for the expenses that are being passed down to the dashboard and then to the form and the lists. Okay, going back to what we talked about with our diagram earlier with Twitter, we wouldn't need all of the tweets at the application state. Okay, that would live in the state of the dashboard for the tweets, or maybe we won't call it a dashboard, we call it a container. Okay, so we would hoist that up a level, but the thing that we do want is anytime we need shared state across child components or descendant components in the hierarchy of the app, we go up to the most recent shared parent, grandparent, ancestor, etc. Okay, so we need to go up to the point where the branch of our tree or the branches of our tree meet, and that's usually a good place for that shared state to be housed or stored. All right. Any more questions on that?
So this is just a static component right now.
Yep. This one's just a static component. All right. So let's go ahead and build out our dashboard component real quick. Okay, so we're going to import React from React. We're going to import UUID from UUID/v4. Import, we'll come back to the expense form in the list in a sec. Let's set up our scaffold for dashboard container. Extends React component. Needs constructor that accepts props. Call super on props. And we're good to go. Okay. Now, yesterday, we also had a component lifecycle hook, so we're going to say component did update. And we're going to console.log. We'll call this dashboard state. Okay, and do we have state in this dashboard right now?
Well, kind of, because we got it from the app, right?
How do we access that?
Through the get app function thing.
Sort of.
Get state, whatever it is.
Props.
Well, yeah, which was on props.
Yes. So we go this.props.app.state. Right? This log right here will log out the exact same thing that we get here. Okay, so it's redundant, but it's good exercise to keep those things in mind. And then we're also going to do a render method, set up our return, and it's going to return a div, class name of dashboard container. Before we forget, let's export default dashboard container.
So
Oops, export default. Go ahead, Tim.
to your question, would you then say that the dashboard container does have state, or it does not have its own state, but it has inherited state? How would you phrase it?
It has the read-only state that we've given it through props.
Right.
It does not have its own state. It has the ability to read the app state and affect the app state.
I'm just trying to make sure I got the lingo right.
Yeah, cool. All right, so now what we're going to do with the dashboard, so let's throw a little h2 tag here that says, welcome to the expense tracker app. And we're going to drop our two child components here. So we have the expense form and the expense list. Okay. Now, this is slightly different from what I did yesterday here in a second. Yesterday, we had this method here called expense create, where we abstracted away and passed this secondary kind of wrapper down into the expense form that would create an expense and update state. I'm going to get rid of that and simplify it a little bit, since I feel like that was a little divergent from what we talked about the day before yesterday, where we created the ability to affect app state at the app level. So I'm going to continue that one pipeline of that get app functionality, that set state and state, read only and mutate, or read only and update, I should say. We're going to just pipe that thing directly through here. So by inheriting props, I can say app is this dot props dot app, and now I pass that state and set state directly through to the expense form as this dot props dot app in the expense form. Okay, rather than that extra handling of another function that wraps that functionality. And all we're gonna do is take the expense create, the internal functionality of that method that we created here in dashboard, and just hand that down or recreate that functionality in the form component, so that we make our expense or create our expense object there and then set it into the app state at that level. Okay. The other thing we had on the expense list was a list of expenses, which came from this .props.app.state. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of confused on 18. You just said it, but maybe I blanked. So, is that gonna essentially affect the app state, or is it just read the app state?
So here's that getApp method that we created in the main.
Yeah.
Okay, that got passed down to dashboard container.
Yeah.
As this .props.app.setState and state.
Okay.
In the dashboard container, oops, we're over here. We're taking this .props.app.state and setState and passing those as app to the expense form. So it's just a direct handoff. I hand you a note, you hand it directly to Maddie, she hands it directly to Gavin. Gavin can read that note, write on that note, and hand it back to Maddie, back to you, back to me.
Why does, because I thought props is read only, so how would that give the ability of that app to pass back up?
Right, because this get app has this bound set state method with the context of the application state or the application component. Go ahead, Tim.
So by moving that, you're effectively moving the create expense into the expense form.
Yep.
So would the UUID also need to be moved?
Oh, it would. Yeah, we won't need that. But we will need to import our expense form from expense form and import expense list from expense list. All good? Okay. Moving over to our expense form. So we'll build out the input piece here first. And what we're going to do, start off with our usual scaffold for the component. So we'll import React from React and fire up a class for expense form, which extends React component. Has a constructor that inherits props. We call super on props. And we're off to the races. Okay. Now the expense form is going to track the state of that form and the two input values from that form. So when we take input from the form level, we need a title. Oops. It's that state. Oh, I need to be in the constructor. Do you have a question, Tim?
No, sorry.
Okay. So we have a title of an empty string and a price that starts at 0. Okay. Now our form is going to need a handle change, which needs to be in the constructor. This dot handle change dot bind this, and a submit. Okay, which also implies we will need a handle change, handle submit, and a render method.
I have a question.
No questions.
Okay.
What do you got, Gavin?
Can you do a form, a blank form real quick?
Oh yeah, give me one sec. Let me export this before I forget. Form.
And then have like the on submit. So I'm confused between on submit, on change, and which functions to call at which times. Because it seems like, why do we have an on change if there's an on submit?
Good question.
Unchanged.
I actually do want to talk about that today because we have not talked at length about this. So let me create an input here real fast so that we can talk about the difference between the two. So we're going to have a name of, title, placeholder of title, a value of this.state.title, and an on change of this.handle change. Okay. Now, when we work with forms in React, okay, React, what's the damn terminology? React has this very specific terminology for setting and getting, or the ability to either get only, read only, or both read and write input fields. I think they call them connected and unconnected, but I'll have to look up the terminology. Basically, if we forget to add a value, this is a read-only input field. Okay? If we forget to put a value and a change handler. If we add a value, without a change handler, this is still a read-only input. So in order for us to be able to write into an input field, we have to have a change handler. We have to have something listening on that input field to then take that user input and do something with it. In our case, we're affecting the state of this view, this component. Okay. Now, while this input, having a change handler, can affect the state of the component, the way that we actually capture that state and do something with it is through this onSubmit. Okay, so this is a way for us to real-time update the state as we're entering input into the field. Once we're done filling out the form, this is the handler that says, I'm done filling everything out, I've hit submit, I want to do something with this thing in its completion. Let me know if you have any follow-up question there.
I just want to see on change, or I mean, handle change function.
Okay, we'll get that in a sec. Let me fill out the other two inputs here. This one is going to be a type of number with a name of price, placeholder of price, a value of this.state.price, and an on change of this.handleChange. Okay, we're using the same change handler here.
Can you link this submit of these forms to a button that's outside of the form? If you created a button that's outside of the form and you attached an on-click, you say on-click fire handle submit function.
Good question. Probably, but I don't know why you would. Right? The whole point of a form is to be a self-encapsulating capture point of data. So yeah, you probably could, but I feel like it would be a little too much of a monkey patch to make it work. Okay. Yeah, that's probably how I would approach it, but don't. All right, so a button, remember, a button is just a general element in a form unless you actually give it a type of submit. The submit type is actually what triggers this onSubmit event. So that's an important piece, which is why we have to prevent default. Yeah. So let's fill that out real quick. So now yesterday, let's do our prevent default before we forget. So there's that. Yesterday what we did is we said this.handle expense create through here, or this.props, because we created that expense create method in the dashboard and handed it down through props. Today we are going to use this.props.app.setState because we've handed that set state all the way from application to dashboard now to form, so we can take direct advantage of that thing, that functionality. Okay, so we're going to say previous state and wrap that. No. Sure.
Since it happens first,
Yeah.
Yep, so handle change is going to work on the set state method of this component. Okay, not the app layer. So we'll give that an object, and we are going to say e.target.name. We'll have a value of e.target.value. So square bracket notation allows us to take the name attribute of the target of the event. So that says title will get a value of whatever we enter into the title input, and price will get a value of whatever we enter into the price input. And as we trigger changes to those inputs, every time we type something and change the state of the input, it updates the state of the component. Nope, this updates as you type.
So and with React, it's basically re-rendering. It doesn't re-render everything, right? It just will re-render just that piece.
On state change, it will re-render the component. Yeah. Okay. Now, here, inside of the submission, we have a previous state from the application layer. Okay? And it has an expenses, oops, come on, get out of there, property that is an array. Okay? So we need to say expenses will be a new array which spreads the previous state's expenses out first. So we take all of the previous expense objects and spread them out into a new array. And then we add the state, or the current object, and its state.
Just, I forgot, the spreading, was that new to like ES5 or 6?
6. Yeah. Chelsea, I just posted this morning. Node's upcoming 8 release, 8 dot whatever release, is going to natively support rest and spread, or gather and spread. I prefer the term gather and spread, but you may hear rest and spread as, I think, a more common term.
It's super handy. It's like,
Yeah.
it gets rid of a lot of the.
Yeah. So the caption to this little code block right here talks about object.assign, and almost everything you all have done up to this point, when working with prototypal inheritance, has been creating a constructor function and prototype methods. You have a person object right here. Okay, it inherently has all of the base prototypal functionality of a JavaScript object. It also now has a name, a last, an age, and a cool property. Okay? So here's the person object that you just created. If you look at the type of this thing, it is an object. Object constructor, that is an object. Okay? If we created a constructor function for this, it would be a person object. Okay? When we do this, person, we're inheriting all of these properties as if this thing were a constructor, and then giving them new values. So when you look at person 2, you've just created a prototypal clone of the first person and given it its own new flavor of values. So when you see something like object.assign, object.create, those are traditionally better ways of doing prototypal inheritance. They're more confusing, which is why we teach you constructor functions first. But at some point in your JavaScript life, this is going to become a newer syntax for object.assign, but the fundamental of object.assign and object.create are things that you will want to learn. Okay? Constructors are still a thing, don't get me wrong. Okay, constructors, classes, object.assign, object.create, they all have their place in the world, but these are more advanced layers of JavaScript that at some point you're going to want to figure out and start to apply. All right, so back to this. So one more quick review here. So we have a form. As we enter data into these two input fields, we fire on change. That updates the state in real time, the state of the component. When we hit submit, we capture the state of the component and pass it back up to the application state as a new expense that's added to that array of expenses. Okay, we don't add something explicitly or literally. What we're doing is rewriting or overwriting with a completely new array. That new array is composed of the previous expenses and the new expense. So this is a pure functionality. Okay. Any questions on that before I do a list? Sorry?
Do we need to check, like, get the prices, change and submit?
Yeah, you are getting the price. Right? This handle change is getting the title and the price and updating state. And then the handle submit takes the state object and gets both of these things. So this object becomes the new expense in the array.
So the previous state dot expense, where is that expense?
Expenses. Thank you. You caught me on that yesterday.
Okay, so that's just assuming that there's like a list of expenses somewhere.
Yeah, so where is that somewhere? Where is this expenses array? At the app.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
All the way back here.
Totally forgot about that. Okay, yeah.
Okay. So let's whip up our expense list real fast. So we are going to import React from React and create a class expense list which extends react.component, has a constructor that takes props, call super on those props, and then we are going to do this.state. We'll have an expense list like so. Okay, and we'll do this. I'll show you both ways to do this again today, but let's set up our render method first. Holy cow, that was wonky. That looks better. Return, and this is going to return a div, class name of expense list. And inside of the div, we'll come back to that before I forget. Let's export. Default expense list. Okay. Now, inside of the div, we are going to check to see if there is something to render. So this.state.expense list, question mark. Okay. The implication here is a ternary operator. If there's something to render, we will render an unordered list. Otherwise, we will render an H2. And really what I want to say, this is the bug that I had yesterday. Do y'all remember I couldn't get the H2 to render?
Yeah.
Okay. I actually didn't think of this yesterday. I just realized this now.
Because it always exists.
Yeah. So this state.expense list is a truthy value because it's an empty array. But if we add a dot length, if it's an empty array, it's 0, which is falsy, which will flip us down to our H2. I don't know why I didn't think of that yesterday. There are no expenses. Okay. Otherwise, if there are expenses, we are going to need to say, and actually let's do this. Let's say this dot props dot app dot state, like so. This dot expense list dot map expense, and we will return an li. Remember, we have to add a key, which will now be the expense ID, and we're going to say expense.title and expense.price. And we can optionally do this on one line if you like. It's kind of a long line, but that will take the current array of expenses from the app state.
You forgot to put state on this expenses.
Thank you. Okay. Takes the current app state and assigns it to expense list here in this component. And then from there, we map this thing out. Okay. I could even argue that we could simplify this, and rather than this dot state dot expense list, this dot props dot app dot state dot expenses. It's kind of a mouthful, right? Which is probably why we did it the other way. But now we're working directly off of the state of the application. So maybe what we do here is drop that down, give us a little bit of line, a little bit of room to read.
So if you created a button to update something, and it successfully updated an item in that app state array,
Mm-hmm.
your page would re-render?
Yep.
Would it reload the page, or it would like actually re-render the correct?
Re-renders the component. Any component that utilizes or inherits that state will re-render. The page will not reload. This is, in a way, this is similar to an AJAX request where you don't have to reload the page, but that piece of data that's rendered will update with the new content.
Would line 11 need to change as well?
Yeah.
Would you put the update code in this list file?
Nope. No, I'd create a separate component.
Just to handle updates?
Yep. It's a different form.
Where's the expense construction actually taking place?
In the expense form. So that's this state layer here. All right, let's see if we've got something working. If we do, we'll take a break. Otherwise, you get to watch me debug. All right, successful compile. Woo! Localhost 8080. Uh-oh, that's not good. Cannot read property state on line 11 of our list. This.props.app.state.expenses? Really? This.props.app.state. Did I pass it down from the dashboard? Oh, I passed the state down, so it's just this dot props dot app dot expenses.
Do you need to import?
Nope. Let's see if that fixed our issues. Come
I
on.
bet you it's gonna have some expenses somewhere.
Probably. Let's just pass the app through. Well, that's not good. Thank you. It doesn't like this. All right, let me go back.
App state?
You can say that you were right.
What's that?
You can say you were right.
Maybe. Let's say this dot state or this dot props dot app dot state dot expenses. All right, let's simplify this.
Line 16,
Yeah, 16 is.
should it be the stop props dot app
Man,
You just
Here.
change it back.
You change it back.
I know. How's that look? Typo check?
Yes.
Yep. Line 14. Yeah, maybe it doesn't like that I'm directly grabbing the state here. So let's go this dot state dot expenses, this dot state dot expenses. And just to double check, we're passing in the app, which will say this dot props dot state dot app dot state dot expenses. Let's see if it likes that. And let's call this expense list. Thank you. Lisp. It's typo check. What? Boundary property state of undefined. All right, expense list still on line 7. So this dot props dot app dot state should be coming through from. Oh, it's because I called it expenses. Fuck. Let's just call this app. That's actually the fucking problem the whole time. All right, no expenses. So let's buy Gavin a new razor at $100, and we have a razor. Each child in an array of iterators should have a unique key prop. It does! It does though, it does though.
You never did the UUID.
Yeah.
Oh, why didn't you guys tell me that?
That's why I asked you where the construction was taking place.
Y'all got it. Hey, look, I can't be held responsible for anything. Y'all put way too much pressure on me here. You know, let's actually get Gavin a massage.
From my head.
All right, let's look at the state here. What's wrong with the state? So we've got expenses. It has a UUID. Okay, we're getting this thing. Oh, I called it UUID. Good golly, Miss Molly. All right, now we're gonna get that massage. You know what, Gavin? You're gonna get a 60-minute massage for $200. And then we're gonna send you to a kickboxing course for $300. All right, off to the races. Thank you all for debugging for me. And apparently Chrome is coming out with some new stuff.
Yeah, crowd.
Woo!
More rain.
ES6 module support. Woo! Close. All right. Any final questions before we take a little break here?
Can you hit submit without entering it?
Say that again.
Can you just hit submit without entering anything?
Yeah, it'll go.
Yes.
We're working on, I guess.
Ain't no validation.
Is hitting enter the same as a submit?
So if you focused on the form,
Yep.
yeah, hitting enter will submit. Let's make sure our dashboard and our about look good. All right. All right, let's be back in about 10 minutes, please.